Hello and welcome to the TFF podcast by Fantasy Football Hub, our pre-season episode of the 2021 season as we wade through the rules, player lists and data for Telegraph Fantasy Football. It is great to be back. My name is Andrew and I'm joined as usual by two superb Telegraph Fantasy managers. Firstly, Luke Wilson. Luke, are you hoping for a better season this season than last?
Yeah, just not half. It was a terrible season last year. So game face is on. Game face.
Absolutely. And we also have the Hub's resident statistician, Carl Weeks. Welcome, Carl. Have you had a good summer?
Thanks. Yeah, I've had a brilliant summer and looking forward to the new season.
Fantastic.
And putting last one behind us.
So for those who haven't watched or listened to us before, you are very, very welcome. We started this podcast midway through last season. This is our first pre-season podcast, which we are very excited to bring you. As the Telegraph game isn't as time-consuming in season as some other fantasy games, we tend to record once a month. We hope you make this a regular watch and listen. We do recommend everyone watches the YouTube version, as Carl's stats are a sight to behold, but we will do our best to make this as podcast friendly as possible too. Many thanks to everyone who sent in questions via the WhatsApp groups, on Twitter or via the Hub. We'll endeavour to answer them all as we work our way through and answer any others at the end. So for our YouTube watchers, if you haven't subscribed to us yet, please press the subscribe button in the bottom right hand corner of the screen to ensure you don't miss anything. Also, please press the like button if you enjoy our content, and don't forget to download our new free Fantasy Football Hub app, which includes everything our website offers. Just search for Fantasy Football Hub from wherever you get your apps. Okay, so our agenda for this podcast. First, we will look at the basic rules for new players so they can understand how to play the game and any tweaks that have been made from last season. We'll look at the impact of the rule changes. We will then dive into Carl's data for a series of brilliant TFF insights. We'll look to pick out some bargains from the player lists. We'll share our drafts and then answer any remaining questions. So for this podcast, firstly, as we know we have a few new players watching and listening, we thought we would run through the basic rules of the game, any changes from last season and the potential impact of them. So firstly, in this graphic, we have the scoring system, which I will run through now. But just to touch on a few of the basics from an article we have on the Hub called How to Play Telegraph Fantasy Football. Here are the basic rules. So how to play, you have a 50 million budget. You pick a team of 11 players, line up in one of 6 formations. So there's no bench. That is important to understand. In terms of scoring points, so it's on screen, but I'll just run through it briefly for our podcast listeners. Start 11 appearance, you get 2 points. Sub appearance, 1 point. Goal scored, 5 points. Assists, 3 points. Red cards, -3. Yellow card, -1. Missed penalty, -2. Own goal, -3. So reasonably similar, to Sky and FPL and other games. Goalkeepers only will get a penalty save for 5 points. There are also full clean sheet points. If a player plays 60 minutes or more, they get 5 points. There's also something unique to Telegraph called a part clean sheet. Player plays fewer than 60 minutes, gets a clean sheet, they get 2 points. First goal conceded, 0 points. Goal is -1. Points are not awarded for penalty shootouts. What's really important here as well to understand for players new to the game, Premier League games count, so do FA Cup, and that adds a really different, there are no overhauls, there are no wild cards, so your game week 1 team probably a lot more important setting up than in other teams because you don't have that wholesale change function that you have in other games. One of the most unique parts of the Telegraph game as well is you can actually transfer players in and out in between games as long as there's a 2-hour gap. And for 99.9% of matches played in the Premier League and the FA Cup, there is a 2-hour gap. So just to use a real life example there, if a game is played at 12:30 and you have Aguero in for your Man City game at 12:30, you can grab his points in the 12:30 game. You can then transfer him out, for example, for Harry Kane, who's playing for Spurs in the 3 o'clock game. If you actually wanted then, you could transfer Kane out of the 3 o'clock game to bring in Mohamed Salah for the 5:30 game. Liverpool are playing there. So it does, again, it adds a real twist to everything, and planning is really important when it comes to that. There are no price changes in TFF. So they're the basic rules. In terms of rule tweaks, there are 2 major ones that more experienced TFF managers should be made aware of. So firstly, the 5-4-1 formation that we've all been gagging for has finally been introduced. However, the flip side to that is they have taken away 5-3-2, which was also a really good formation. Probably lesser experienced players are saying, why the hell would you want 5-4-1? But we'll touch on that later when Carl looks into the points per million stats. which does kind of heavily suggest every year that defensive options are the way to go. Secondly, and maybe more significantly, the key contribution role has been scrapped and replaced with just assists. So these are that is a massive change again for experienced TFF players, with second KCs or assisting the assister being a massive part of the game for years and years, and benefiting lots of deeper lying midfielders and wingers who tend to pass the ball onto the assist. So that's a big change as well. So we had a question in around this from Simon Baldock, and what are the likely impacts configuration of key contribution to assists have on selection? So I'll stop talking for a second. Luke, can I ask you your thoughts firstly, I suppose, on the changes, and maybe to answer Simon's question from your perspective?
It's a really interesting dynamic. So when I started playing the game, it wasn't there. Then it came in and took me half a season to adjust, and I've got used to it. And what's really, I think, interesting for me is some of the players that really benefit from this are the ones that you probably wouldn't expect. So we were talking pre-recording. So Raheem Sterling, I know he got one actual assist over the course of the season, got about 6, I think 5 or 6 in FBL. He gets about half his assists removed in TFF now. So he goes from 11 assists down to what would be 6, because you get a similar thing. So if you shoot and the keeper saves, it rebounds. I think the biggest impact is on Mahrez. So this is, I mean, we talked about it in our first pod and second pod, I think, and then me and you jumped on him, and it burnt us badly because he was playing a lot, and then he stopped. But he looks like he's dropping somewhere in the region of sort of 9 to 11 assists a season. If you factor that in, that's a about 30 odd points that he's going to be down from where he was last year, and he was one of the top scorers in the game last year. There's a few sort of other surprising ones. So there's a couple of the wing backs as well. So somebody like Matt Doherty, he's fairly down. KDB's another one to sort of shout out. Sort of Son is another one. There's quite a few. Chilwell's another one, sort of another wing back. So these are all guys that sort of probably are passing to the person who crosses the ball in for the goal, or passing to the person who has the original shot and then gets parried and then somebody taps it in. So it does have an impact on those people who are sort of heavily involved in the game, losing out a bit. So it's going to be an interesting change. And I think for me, it probably works quite well, because my grounding sort of 25 plus years ago when I started playing this game is that it wasn't there. So I'm quite looking forward to it not being there. But I think certainly, I know you were a massive fan of it, Andrew. So I don't know if you're feeling happier about it or sadder about it, but I'm quite looking forward to it, actually.
I'm disappointed because it was unique, and I also really, I think assisting the assister in real life football is just as important as the assist in the goal, right? So how many times, just use an example, does De Bruyne play a wonderful 40-yard through ball, split the defence? Sterling will just square it for Aguero to tap in, right? In that move, the whole skill is in De Bruyne's pass, and he gets absolutely zipped. Whereas in TFF, he did get awarded points for it, and I'm disappointed because it was a bit unique. One observation I've made, which is quite interesting. So just for our YouTube watchers, look at the list on the right-hand side. It shows the impact of the difference of the second KCs being removed off. And if you look at the types of players, but also the teams, I found it really interesting, actually. In those top kind of 15 names there, they are mainly made up of Man City, Tottenham and Arsenal players. And I found that interesting, kind of observationally. And it's maybe because maybe Spurs, Arsenal and City pass the ball around, kind of a little bit more before scoring the goals. So, if you think of like Liverpool, a lot of goals come from, Robertson and Trent and things like that, kind of in-swinging crosses and stuff. I found that interesting, maybe to look in terms of the kind of teams who scored those goals. It'll be really interesting to see the impact when we come to the points a bit later on of how that impacts the points. But just for those who can't see it, so on the slide, Mahrez would have lost 11 KCs last season, which equates to 33 points, which is massive. Sterling would have lost 10, Mount 9, De Bruyne 9, Doherty 8, Pepe 7, Lacazette 6, Maddison 6, Alexander-Arnold 6, Lamela 6, Son 6, and Lo Celso 6 before you move on down there. We should say that this data was scraped from a site called FF Stuff, was it, Carl? Sorry.
Yeah, ffstuff.co.uk.
Yeah, so it's scraped from ffstuff.co.uk, which actually falls on the real stats and not fantasy stats. So just for example there, it shows that Sterling's got 1 assist, which he actually did have 1 assist last season. He had 6 fantasy assists, but he had 1 physical assist. So just to mention that. Carl, what are your thoughts on the changes?
Well, even though I may have played donkeys years ago, I've only played the Telegraph for like about 2 years, so I haven't really got embedded into the KC's key contributions. So I remember when I played 2 years ago, it's like, oh, they've got my points wrong because they've given me 3 points and he didn't get the assist. And it's like, then you learn about the key contributions. So I did quite enjoy it, but I didn't really factor it in. I just looked at people's total points. So to me, I quite like it that it's been consistent with the other changes.
Okay, so to finish off this brief section then, so on the Fantasy Football Hub website, we have the full How to Play Telegraph Fantasy Football Guide, in addition to How to Win at Telegraph Fantasy Football, which is a members article and features a lot more detailed information in how to successfully play the game. Those links are in the description below for our YouTube watchers. So next for our YouTube watchers, we begins Carl's data dive with the top point scorers from last season. So Carl, can you just pull out the interesting points from this?
There's 3 sets of tables that I'll take you through, and the first one's called total point scorers from last season, and that's with this year's prices. So I list the top 20 or 25 players based on the number of points they scored last year, and there's 4 columns: 1 for keepers, 1 for defenders, midfielders, and strikers. So it's just listing them in order, and as you'd imagine, most of these are the most expensive players. As well as the points, I give 2 other columns next to it. It's the points per million. So you can compare between players about what you may consider value, and also points per million per game. So this also makes some sort of adjustment in case somebody was injured for a few games. You can actually compare between players in the same position, but it also helps you to a certain degree to go compare between positions. So if you look at the defenders, naturally, or I say naturally, you've got the usual suspects at the top with TAA, Robinson, then Doherty and VVD. Notice a couple of Sheffield United players making it up to the top, and they're quite cheap. If you look at the points per million per game, the defenders score about 1. So given their number of games, they're scoring near enough a point per million. Whereas if you move to your midfielders, even though they're scoring more points, they're much more expensive, and therefore their points per pound per game is less than 1, and it drops off a lot quicker as you further go down. So that's all I'd sort of say there, because you've got the usual suspects there, unless Luke or Andrew wishes to make any other comment.
Yeah, so just to read out the lists for the top scoring goalkeepers were Schmeichel with 142 points, Dean Henderson with 141, Edison with 138, Fisher with 136, and Pope with 128. Alexander Arnold scored 207 points last term. Robertson scored 190, Doherty 183, Van Dijk 181, and in midfield, De Bruyne scored 228, Sterling scored 198, Salah scored 190, Mane 187, and Mahrez 183. And then for strikers, Aubameyang scored 217 points, Vardy 202, Ings 202, and Martial 119. I suppose the thing which jumps out to me there immediately, if you take off the second KC points we spoke about earlier, an example, Bruyne goes down 30 odd points, and all of a sudden he's down under 200 points, which I think is quite interesting. Same for Sterling, which actually potentially makes Salah and Mane, who weren't high on that list, maybe the better price options in midfield this season. Luke, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually going to make a slightly different point, so I'll come back to that question. But I also wanted to highlight that Alisson, despite not playing probably at least a third of the season, had one of the best points per million ratio. In fact, only Dean Henderson and Martinez had a great run at the end for Arsenal after lockdown. And I think there's a really key thing in Telegraph is that actually your keeper. Probably don't make any transfers on the keeper, but there's not a huge difference between the budget ones and the expensive ones because of the clean sheets. But in terms of the question, I guess, around the knock-on effect of that key contribution, I think I'm disappointed that 5-3-2 is gone, but I've been wanting 5-4-1 for a long time, and I think that plays to that song, I guess, in that you get that. However, the strikers do score more goals and probably get less assists than the midfielders. So I think if you're looking at those midfielders, I think the people that were sort of coming out as not losing so many. So Salah wasn't on that list. Mane wasn't on that list. So these selfish wingers, it's a bit harsh calling them both selfish, but I think there's been plenty of press coverage on the relationship of Mane and Salah and who passes to who. But I think looking at those sort of more selfish wingers is probably where I'll be looking to go, and probably in the lower teams. And I think the loss of those key contributions for some of those deep lying players. A couple of the Sheffield United boys were on that table of the biggest losers, and you wouldn't touch those midfielders for your life in any other game, but they were quite useful because they got those the pass to the pass, those through the slide rule balls and things like that. So it is going to be really, really quite interesting how that goes. So I think my advice would be probably for your midfield, focus on those people who are likely to be more shooting rather than passing, because they won't pick up those extra points. And if the pricing doesn't seem to have changed much considering the rule change. So, I mean, I've always loved big at the back. Written, in every format, I've always been sort of wedded to better defenders more than strikers and midfielders. And I think that plays more to that. So, put as much money at the back as you can, unless you can get people for under sort of 2.5 million, then chuck the money there. But
and this next slide kind of backs that up. So this is my personal favourite stat, and it's points per million. If we just have a look through. So in terms of goalkeeper, Henderson came out on top last season, points per million of 40.3. Then it was Schmeichel and Patricio around 34, Edison and De Gea at 31. If you look at defenders then, so Doherty was top with 46.9. So even though he will now lose I think he had 8 second assists, he will now lose. He was on 46. Baldock on 45. Stevens was on 44. Egan on 43, Johnny on 42, Johnny Evans at 40. So those Sheffield United and Wolves defenders in terms of points per million, head and shoulders above everyone else, but also head and shoulders on everyone else in terms of the whole game as well. If we just recap there, Henderson was top of the keepers with 40, Doherty was top of defenders with 46.9, top of midfielders for points per million. Almiron with 35.8, with De Bruyne then down on 35.1, Mount 34.9, Barnes 34.9, Fornals 33.8. So this is basing on last year's points with this term's price. And in terms of strikers then as well, so it's a similar story when it gets to strikers, and their points per million is even lower. So Ings 34.8, Martial 32.6, Jimenez 32.2, Aubameyang 31. So they're top for the strikers. So again, if you look at that kind of trend, big at the back looks the way to go. So I'll definitely be looking at either a 5-4-1, 4-5-1 potentially. You don't just want to pray for clean sheets every week, right? And who's to say this year that Wolves' defence will be good as last year? Sheffield United, Leicester, obviously first half of last year were incredible. That won't happen again. But this is my favourite stat and the one which I tend to kind of model my teams around. Carl, what are your kind of expert data views on this?
Exactly the same point that you sort of come up with in terms of the order, and it's very useful to compare between positions, but this is where you start looking for your differentials. So the first table is where you're looking for your premiums, which are the top premiums for position. Problem is, you've only got a limited budget, and within that budget, you can't buy all of them. So you're then looking for how can you have your differentials, your enablers, and which ones offer the best value for money. And then, this is one of the tables to go straight to.
Just to point on that, and Andrew, you've alluded to the volume of new players that have been kind of engaging with you. Different to all of the other games, because you don't have a captain, and this is a really important point, value is king. You're not looking for the best players in the Telegraph, you're looking for the best value. So whatever combination you can come up with. And so it's quite interesting to me. So Trent and Robbo, for example, still offer pretty good value for the prices they're at, but you will find 5 better defenders from a value perspective. Interesting. I mean, I would never in a million of years have put Almiron in there. I wouldn't touch him with a barge pole in any other game. You've now got me thinking on that one. But I think it's finding the players like Mason Mount, who I think last year was 3 million in the game. He's gone up a fair amount. Danny Ings, I think as a striker was about, I think it was 5.2 from memory, 5.2, 5.3. So really good price compared to sort of 7 million for Aguero. And those are the ones that you really want to find. So it's not about necessarily having the Salah or KDB, although you can see KDB, it was almost essential because midfield is his second, and he was pretty much the second most expensive midfielder last year. But it's that value one. And because you don't have that captain to kind of get the double points, it's all about value. It's not about getting the best scorers. So I will be looking for the value over everything. And as soon as I spot people who are likely to play regularly, they'll be straight into my team because of the limited transfer thing and no overhauls and things.
Without looking at the slide, knowing what a legend Soyuncu was in this format last year, who do you think scored the most points, Soyuncu or Almiron?
I would have said Soyuncu, but maybe he didn't, because it's all about clean sheets, isn't it?
Carl, what are your
couple of goals.
I would have said Soyuncu as well would have scored more.
You're both right, but Soyuncu scored 138 points, Almiron scored 136, which I find absolutely incredible. Calvert-Lewin scores 130. Bear in mind that kind of run he went on. Almiron could actually be a decent option this time round, say. But there's some amazing...
We can't advocate that. We cannot advocate Almiron.
He even scored more than Harvey Barnes, who had a really good season last year. It's really interesting stuff, actually. I love this data. I love Carl's graphs. I could spend days and days looking at Carl's graphs because it just brings out so much information. And for anyone who also plays FPL and Sky, Carl produces kind of similar-ish data for FPL and Sky on the hub as well. So if you are interested in this sort of information, Carl's looking a bit panic-stricken. I mentioned that now. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar sort of statistical analysis. Just to go on to the next slide then. So this goes just a level deeper. This is points per million per game, which Carl alluded to earlier. So the names on the top of these lists are probably, not as prominent and probably wouldn't be in our game week 1 teams per se. But Carl, do you just want to kind of explain what this means?
Yeah, so this is the table ordered by the top points per million per game. And this is trying to look out for little gems that won't actually appear in the other 2 tables. So there's a lot of players here that you'd look at and you just say, oh, they'll never play the full season. So you really want people who are going to play most of the season. But there are players who have been injured or who joined through the January transfer window or started playing at the end of the year, who would have had limited game time and therefore wouldn't have had the total points to appear in the first 2 tables. So you can look through the for the keepers, and you've got Martinez of Arsenal being top, but the problem is he's not going to play, so I wouldn't consider him. And probably the same with Henderson, because he's, will he be at Man United or will he be loaned out? You don't know, so you wouldn't go for him. And then you've got Alisson, and even though Luke mentioned about him before, he was quite a bit down on the previous 2 tables, but he's the first keeper you'd come to that gives you the value of points per million per game. And that's because he missed quite a few. Again, you can go through the defenders, and most of them I would just ignore. I think the first one that would jump out to me would be Bolly, which is halfway down the list. He scored 98 points last season, value of 28 points per million, and 1.27 points per million per game that he played. So, but he probably was quite high up on the list. The midfielders, one name that we haven't mentioned on the previous 2 tables, but now appears in the slide, is Bruno, because he joined in January. So you can actually see that he's got a very good value. We'd imagine that Bruno plays every game, and he's scoring at 0.98 for his current price and how many points he played per game last season. And that's higher than Kevin De Bruyne at 0.95. And that's even before you start adjusting for the less key contributions. So you'd lose this, you'd go down this list, and you have to use your knowledge about which players you think will be there. So Jeffrey Slupp, I quite like him, and he will score a lot of points. The big question is, he was injured a lot. Will he be injured again this season? And will he make it into the Palace team? If he does, it'll be a bargain. Probably ignore. And I'll just, the one that jumps out at me, probably the first one would be Bowen. And then you've got the other West Ham chap just below him. And then you've got St. Maximum. So you're coming up with some good names there, which you may not notice in the previous table.
Interesting one on the strikers. So the top of the strikers, for those who can't see it, Iheanacho, who this time round is 3.4 million. Now, obviously, you're not going to put Iheanacho in your team, right? Vardy gets injured, Iheanacho is going straight in my team because he has a very high points per pound per game. He's 3.4 million, which is incredibly cheap for someone playing in front. But when he does play, he scores a lot of points. I think the thing for me that kind of jumped out here as well is it's the same trend in terms of the best player in the league when he plays for points per million per games is Phil Bardsley, which I found absolutely astounding, but he gets 1.59 points per million per game based on the price he is now when he plays. Now, he finished the season really, really well. And I noticed Loughton's in there as well, and Eric Peters is in there as well in that list. So that Bardsley for me was actually in one of my drafts. I'm not sure if I've got him in the draft, which I'm sharing later, but if he keeps his place, 2.3 million for a Burnley defender who actually gets forward as well. Looks an absolute steal. You know, you've got the other ones in there, kind of when they play. Got Dan, Eric Garcia, Zinchenko. Justin's in there, interestingly, even though obviously, you know, Leicester's defence is a bit of a mess at the moment. And over on the strikers then, you've got Giroud. So when he plays, he scores a lot of points. He's very valuable. Wesley's in there, even though, you know, I'm not sure what's going on with him now. Interestingly for me, Marshall and Ings are quite high up as well. So you would have them anyway. Marshall is probably, I wouldn't say it's the first name on my team sheet, but I think he's going to do very, very well this season at a good price there. Obviously, the players that are not in here are some of the players we're going to come to in a little bit. So players like Werner, potentially, all the kind of newer ones, maybe Ziyech, players like that. But really, really interesting stuff. And again, I urge everyone who's listening on the podcast, come and look at these lists on YouTube. We're not just going to read them all out because they'll be incredibly boring and it won't make a lot of sense. But there's such interesting stuff. It gives real insight, into where the value is, which again shows mainly in defence.
One other point, mainly for the people on the podcast, if you've seen it on YouTube, you can sort of see, I've got footnotes sort of say it's worth noting that some players make a lot of cameo appearances last season, and I've mentioned Greenwood and probably Foden. So whenever they make an appearance, that counts as played a match under this metric, and therefore Greenwood, who I quite like for this coming season, doesn't appear because at the beginning of the season, I think he came on. He's played a lot of games, but probably only about 5 minutes, and he scores lowly. Foden is actually second on the midfield list. So if you think he's going to play, he's at a really, really good price. And that's just going back to the point that you sort of talked about before.
So I suppose, Carl, looking at your next slide, what does this mean in terms of what formation we should be looking at based on last season's points, prices? So can you just explain your graphs to us?
Okay. This may be a bit complicated. So for each position, and on the graph on the left-hand side, I've produced a graph for the strikers. I've plotted how many points they score in each game against how much they cost. So you can get like a scatter plot. And then there's a mathematical technique called like a regression or best line of fit, which goes straight through them, which sort of says roughly how much you're increasing your points for how much extra money that you're putting into it. All the players aren't going to be exactly on that line. So you have a bit of random variation. And sometimes you have what we call an outlier. Somebody's been mispriced. So there's all those things to bear in mind. But this just gives an indication of the steepness and how much, if you put an extra money in, what it's worth. So I quite like looking at these graphs, to see if there's an outlier, but secondly, the best line, that line of fit, I put them all four positions onto one graph, which is on the right hand side for those who are viewing via YouTube. And for the left hand side, I've tried to describe what's going on. For the podcast listeners, I've tried to describe the chart itself. I'm going to ignore goalkeepers because there's only one goalkeeper. So your red line, which is your defenders, consistently above the other two lines. But the slope of the line is less steep. So that means as you put more money into your defenders, you're not getting as much value as if you put more money into your midfielders or strikers. To me, the midfielders and strikers, the two lines are near enough the same. There's a slight difference, but considering the margin of error, you could sort of say they're basically the same. How I determine my formation is I would assume, just say you only had £30 million, so you could only spend 3 million on each player. Which positions offers the most value? And that's the red line or the defender. So that sort of like indicates to me that I'd wish to put 5 at the back. When I then sort of, obviously we've got more than 30 million. And if you've got extra cash and you want to sort of spend it invest it in a higher priced player, where would you expect to put that money? And that's where I look at the slope. And therefore, because the midfielders and strikers have a steeper slope, it suggests that I should be investing the money in the strikers. So I'd be looking more at 5 at the back, but cheap 5 at the back, and more premium midfielders and strikers as a broad indication.
Sorry to jump in, Carl, and because I think you're making an interesting point. So I'm natural as an analyst, jumping in and looking at the chart, right? And so if I zoom in at the price bracket of 3 million to about, well, let's say 5.5 million, what I think is really interesting there is that there is more value in those lower priced midfielders. So I'm looking at it's about 0.2 points per million. And so what that's kind of suggesting to me is that if you can find those midfielders at about 3 to 3.5, or ideally, I guess, under that, they're a really good place to put your money. Whereas if you're chucking your money in the strikers at sort of 6 or 7 million, if you can get a banging striker, I mean, because it's about ultimately it's about getting the most points you can. So you could fill your team with a whole load of 3 million players in every position apart from strikers. So you're probably having to look at about 3.5 million there, but probably you could get a team with really good points per value for 35 million quid, and you'd have 15 million left over, and you're not going to win it. But I think what this is really highlighting to me is the importance of getting on those good forwards, using those transfers for those really premium ones. So, and as you talked about, you've got 40 transfers. If you can find those premium ones and get the 3-for-1s or 2-for-1s where they've got 2 really good fixtures, captains, you don't have the captains, so put that aside, but you're still getting those extra games. And if you can get that for those higher ones and have the flexibility to have your pick of the 10 best players in the league who are explosive, I think that's what that's telling me. So it's interesting because I'm going to really try, and I've got Trent and I'm sticking with him, but bar Trent, I'm going to try and have either 3 or 4 defenders that are really dirt cheap, and probably at least 2 midfielders that are dirt cheap as well, and then leave those other 5 positions for people that I'm going to rotate and try and use just my transfers on that after the team's set. And probably going to have to take 5 transfers to find those bargains and get them in. But yeah, what are your thoughts, Carl?
That is basically perfect explanation in a much more succinct way than myself.
Nobody's ever called me succinct before, so thank you. I'll take that. That's very kind.
But yeah, the only thing I'd add is that this is a general indication of formation, and you perfectly put how you should be playing the game. There will be players that we find out are mispriced, either looking at it in detail pre-season or once the season develops, like we had Mount last year and a few others, that you think you just have to go on those and then look about your formation, excluding those ones. So, don't be. It's not rigid, but it's a good indication of what to do.
Some wonderful statistical analysis there, gents. I promise for those who are here just to talk about football that we will get there soon. We're setting all the foundations here for how we should set up our team. We will get onto the players soon, I promise. So our next graphic is the Optimum team, and this is the Optimum team that for using last season's points with the new prices, and this just backs up kind of everything we've been saying, I suppose. So this team would have scored 1,898 points with no transfers based on last year's points using this year's prices. So it shows that Henderson in goals, Alexander-Arnold, Doherty, Baldock, Stevens and Egan. And it shows De Bruyne, Sterling, Mount and Almiron. And then Ings up front by himself. So it's that 5-4-1 formation that we've kind of been talking about, and that would have scored nearly 1,900 points just by itself had you gone with that formation. And then just looking at Carl's algorithm for the forecasted season, then if you look at he's got a team on the left, which does need adjusting because obviously there's some players there who are unlikely to play. But if you look at Carl's algorithm team, which comes out on this right hand side, so this is the team that Carl's algorithm says is forecast to score around 1,900 points. We're not saying to copy this team. I think what we are saying here, look at the formation, look at the kinds of players and make your own decisions on it. It's Henderson in goals. Obviously, Henderson may or not play, so you need to make a decision there. In terms of the back five, you've got Doherty, Robertson, Laporte, Saiss and Vinagre. You've then got a midfield of Salah, Rashford, Antonio and Dele Alli. And then you've got Chris Wood up front by himself. So again, don't necessarily look at the players themselves, but look at that formation. 5-4. Got two premium defenders, one mid-price defender, two cheap ones there. You've also got two premium midfielders and two mid-price midfielders. And then you've got a cheap to medium price striker. So this is the formation that Carl's algorithm suggests is the winning formula for TFF. Bear in mind this is over a season, right? You need to account for fixture swings, 3-for-1s, 4-to-1s, and injuries, everything else that comes along with this. But in terms of setting up a formation that is optimum during the year, 5-4-1 is what Carl's algorithm says the way to go.
Sorry to jump in again, but I would also advocate this. There's this great thing that actually, if you start with a few of those kind of nailed on like defenders, so like Doherty, Robertson, Laporte, they're all going to play. And as soon as the bargains, particularly from the new clubs, there may be, last year we had Dan Burn at 2 million. I mean, he did me well and he didn't at points in the season, but 2 million quid. I mean, that gives you so much. But for example, if you went Robertson down to that, Robertson's got to go a hell of a long way to kind of more than sort of 2.5 or 3 times his score. And that's what I think I'm going to try and do, is try and pinpoint those bargains and move to them as quickly as possible to free up those funds. As the previous graph showed, that investing up front does get you more points. And I think you get roughly the same points for value, but I really advocate that as a starting team. I think Henderson bit there. Vinegar I will be starting with because he's looking nailed, but he will drop out of the team when Otto's fit. But I think the crux is really there, and I think it's a very, very sensible approach actually.
This is an optimum team, so I've run through the algorithm based on the very first 10 matches. Because you want to look at the first 10, I think is a reasonable settling period, and also because we've got a few fixtures that are missing. So instead of having any Man United, Man City players, are they worth having in from the start? So on the top left, it selects the optimum team, but it does, as we've mentioned on the previous slide, have some players that are unlikely to play and therefore you'd wish to extract. And I've done that to sort of like move to the one in the top right-hand corner, which is, I can run through it, is Patricio in goal with Doherty, TAA, Saiss, Vinagre, Bolly, Salah, Antonio, Rashford, Jota, and Raul Jimenez as my striker.
So that's the team. Bearing in mind the first 10 fixtures, only obviously Wolves have got a nice start. That's the team that your algorithm spits out the most points based on the first start of the season.
Yeah. So I've then sort of gone through it myself and started looking at developing my own team. I'm just trying to. Looking at I also wanted to look at matches 2 to 10 because the reason for this is because quite a few teams aren't playing in the first week and they could be disadvantaged. So I wanted to sort of have some idea is if I went from 2 to 10 about what sort of transfers I would be making within the first few game weeks, and should I be, how different would that team be? And therefore, I've started off again with a team that the algorithm spits out again with a lot of players that aren't worthwhile, and that because it brings out a lot more Man City defenders like Otamendi, Stones, Garcia, Mendy, who we know aren't going to play. So I've sort of like taken them out and refined it, and therefore I've got the team to the right. Once you take 2 to 8, 2 to 10, and that's Patricia, Doherty, TAA, Wan-Bissaka, Soris, Vinagre, Rashford, Salah, Antonio, Ali, and Chris Wood. There's quite a big overlap between those two sets of teams. A lot of common names, so that gave me, when we go onto my team, a very good basis of where to start from. One thing that I did realise when I saw the commonality, I thought, there's Wiener of Chelsea, and he's only 5.6, and he's less than Raul Jimenez. So you can slot him in and then start doing some other calculations. But again, it's very similar formation, 5-4-1, 5-4-1. So that sort of led me, confirmed my earlier thoughts about going for 5-4-1 to start with, at least.
Superb. Thank you so much, Carl, for all that data. It's it's absolutely incredible, but it always really helps me in terms of understanding of where to spend my money, not only on game week 1, but throughout the season. So when I'm making my changes, and I think Luke mentioned earlier a really good strategy. It's very hard to stick to. I think this is the point to say, if we can stick to a 5-4-1 or a 4-5-1 and just rotate those attacking premiums, leave your defenders in, trust them through thick and thin. So identify the teams and defenders that you kind of want in for the long haul. Last year it was kind of Leicester for the first half of the season, then Wolves and Sheffield United. The Liverpool fullbacks are the kind of players in choice, and if you just left them all season and rotated your premium midfielders and premium strikers based on form and based on fixtures, you would have done really, really well. So that's kind of what we're taking out of all this, is that's the way to kind of approach the game. Okay, let's go off on a different tack, because my brain is absolutely fried with all that data as it is. So I've got a slide now with the current ownership levels, and the first thing that strikes me all the time, I love it, it's really interesting, is we've just talked about all the values at the back. Let's look at the back. Let's get 5 at the back, and then I look at ownership levels, and it's all or it's mainly all strikers and midfielders. But I'm not sure if you guys have looked at ownership yet. It's just a little bit of a quiz. Who do you guys think is top of the ownership levels so far on TFF? Bear in mind, we're still kind of 9 or 10 days away from the start of the season. Luke, who do you think is top?
For that blank game, I'd instantly say KDB, but probably Werner.
Okay, and Carl?
I'd have guessed Werner or Aubameyang.
It's actually De Bruyne and Werner are both on 37%, so they're the most owned players. Third is Alexander-Arnold on 35%. Fourth is Aubameyang on 34.9%. Greenwood actually 35%. I think everyone is picking up on him. Bruno Fernandes 31%. The next one, to me, I don't think you would ever guess in a month of Sundays if I said, but
is it the Leicester man Fuchs?
It is. It's Christian Fuchs. Never mind the month of Sunday, but it's purely because
still well away from Fuchs. He's not getting anywhere near the team.
He's
nowhere near.
He's not. But people pick him because he's the cheapest player in the game, and it allows him to get in De Bruyne, Werner, Alexander-Arnold, Aubameyang. This is why they pick him. But for me, it's bonkers.
There's so many, in 2.5 down to about 2.3.
He's in 26% of teams.
Ridiculous.
He's in over a quarter of all teams. Absolutely bananas.
I did look at the. It wasn't a pure guess. I did look at percentage ownerships a few days ago. Hence why I sort of it just jumped out at me when I saw that name. I thought, I'm missing something. I haven't got him in my other teams. What's going on?
So he is an interesting one. He's on 26% ownership. Salah's on 25% ownership. So Christian Fuchs is higher owned than Salah at the moment. All this obviously, may change in the week to go. Harry Kane's 23, Doherty 23, Foden 18, Mane 18, Sterling 18, Robertson 18, Alisson 17, Ings 17, Tierney, who's one I am really interested in, on 17, Pulisic 16, Jimenez 13, and Chilwell 13. So, a lot of attackers in there, as you would imagine, and if you were picking a team based on, kind of FPL perspective, even a Sky perspective, then you would expect a lot more similar to that kind of, theme of ownership. But in TFF, as we know, and as Carl's data has hopefully shown everyone, your kind of ownership levels should be a bit more the other side in defense. Okay, so let's touch on drafts then. So our first draft teams, and first up we have Luke. Luke, do you want to talk us through your first draft?
Yeah, I've already made a couple of changes. Yeah, but that's more down to because the first draft was done before we knew the fall of the fixtures, other than knowing that United and City were blank. But if I talk through it then, so I'll start right at the back. So I've got Ryan in goal. There's one reason for that, is that I was really stretching my budget by the point I got to my keeper, and it was the last position. And as we saw with that chart, there's a pretty even correlation between the amount you pay. So a keeper who plays all of the games, but I'll come back to him because who I want is Alisson, and I will be targeting Alisson when I've freed up funds. So I'm not going to say I'll never make a keeper change, but I'll try and make one, maybe two over the season. But I want to get Alisson in, and once he's in, he will not be going anywhere unless it's an FA Cup game or it's an injury, like reasons for getting him out. But to start with the back line, because this is where I started. So the first name on my team sheet was Trent. He's phenomenal. So he's straight in. He's great value despite his high price. I then looked at the price range of all of the players, and then worked up to work out who I wanted to go for, and kind of my guesstimate as who's outstanding value. So I'll start with Vinagre. So Otto's out. If he's nailed, I can't remember, I think he's 2.5 from memory. So ridiculous value for Wolves' run and that clean sheet. You'll see when you get to Carl's team. Carl's agreeing. I won't spoil the surprise other than that. But I think he's a shoe-in, attacking fullback for that team. The next bargain is Tierney. He's probably $1 million underpriced for where he should be. He's 3.2. Trent's 5.6, 5 point something like that. So he's almost half the price, and Arsenal are a much better team. I think they're going to have a decent season. He's involved in a lot. He looked good in the Charity Shield. So stupid price, sorry, Telegraph, but that's a ridiculous price. So he will be in for the long haul. And then there's the last place in my defence for the start. And there's a reason I'm playing 4-4-2, which is a flexibility reason. But the last place there's about 5 or 6 players that I'm sure will come out as we go through your teams. But nobody's talking about Holgate, and he's a nailed-on defender at 2.5 for Everton. So Everton haven't got the best start, but actually they've made some really good signings. They're going to be tighter with the signings they brought in midfield. Ancelotti's brilliant. He's a top manager, and at 2.5, I mean, he's just in. Unless he gets dropped, he's going nowhere at that price, because he's going to offer really good value. So
he gets some attacking returns as well, don't he? He got a couple of assists and a goal last year as well, didn't he?
I'm not counting on any attacking return for 2.5, but Dan Burns scored a few goals. That was wonderful when he scored last year at 2 million, but he also got a few own goals, and I think City thumped them. So that was a horrible score. But, Everton aren't going to concede more than 3 goals to the big boys. Most games they're going to be in, they're going to be competitive. So he's going to pick up clean sheets. And at 2.5, 2 points a game. I mean, it's still going to be 80, 90 points at 2 points a game for the season. So then Salah, first name, I think he'll be the highest point scorer. So for those who are in my draft league, I've got first pick. I'm going for Salah. Sorry. He's the best player in the league until Messi comes. And even then, I'd argue he can probably keep pace with a 31-year-old. So, he's straight in. I'll skip KDB for now because I'll come back to him and what I'm doing. I've got Armstrong, could also be St. Maximin, but both of them at decent prices. I like both of them. Armstrong in comparison, so he's probably a 70, 80-minute player rather than 90-minute player, but Redmond's almost 1 million more. Ings is almost 2 million more. So you're getting an attacker in a good team with form behind them from lockdown. Silly price again. And then Greenwood, because silly price. Now he may go out the team, but by the time he's out the team, I'm probably going to have a few options below 3.6, I think he is, or 3.8. But...
And Greenwood scored 108 points. And bear in mind, pre-restart, he was barely in the team, was he? You know, he didn't really do a lot. So the vast majority of those points were scored in the last quarter of the season at 3.6 million. If he's regular in that United team, he is an absolute steal.
Yeah. And then... So I would have Foden but I don't know if Foden's nailed on, right? So Foden's another one, but Greenwood, Foden, interchangeable for me. Then I've got Werner. I'm going to come back to KDB and Aubameyang in a second, but Werner I think is going to be great. I would have Pulisic probably over Werner because I think he's slightly cheap, but that injury, I don't know whether he's going to start the season. You can't carry anyone. So I'm going with Werner, and again, I can easily shift him back to one of the Chelsea boys. And then I'll come on to my more controversial one. So I've got KDB to start. It will be KDB or Bruno for the start. And I don't know which one. And I think it will be Bruno now because I can get Aubameyang and move him to KDB and get 2 free games and then move him into KDB. So I think that's what I'm going to do. And I've got Aubameyang because I think he's very good. He's one of the top priced strikers, which means that basically I can get any player in the game by moving him. So he's a nice placeholder. He's a big point scorer. He's got a good first fixture. So I'll probably be moving him to KDB, and I'll probably swap KDB to Bruno for the start now that I've got the fixtures. But yeah, I'm pretty happy. And then when I've freed up those funds from over to KDB, then Ryan can go to Alisson at some point when I can get a 2 for 1.
Oh, fantastic there. Thank you, Luke, for that. Carl, we come on to your draft next, which looks very, very different from Luke's draft. Do you want to talk us through yours?
I must say, I haven't got as much football knowledge as both yourself and Luke. So I'm a bit more, I follow the numbers. So a lot of my draft may match very similar to the algorithm's optimization tool. But before I go through my team, I'll just mention, I've sort of like half made 2 rookie mistakes. The first one, it depends on when you played the game. If you're playing to win the whole competition, which I don't, or you play for the mini league. And the reason I say about the whole competition is I've already entered my team and I've got no Fulham and no Arsenal players. And in reality, I should be waiting until the 3 o'clock kickoff on Saturday and then enter my team in case any of my players aren't in the starting lineups. So actually waiting for the 3 o'clock kickoff team news before I enter my actual team. But since I play a lot of mini...
Let's mention that, Carl, actually. That's a really interesting point. So if you're not planning on having any Fulham or Arsenal players, don't enter that team until 3 o'clock, isn't it? I suppose that's a really good point there, Carl. I never thought of, actually, because you get to see the team news, wouldn't you?
Yeah. The only problem is that if you were trying to enter mini leagues like I tried to do, people want you entered and paid up beforehand.
Cash up front.
Yeah, but
people like me.
If you, but if you're playing your 3rd or 4th draft team, you can always put one in at the very last minute if it's just for a bit of fun. But I'll go through my team. Trichot in goal. I've got 5 at the back, which is Doherty, Sias, Vinagre, Bolly, and Robinson. Robinson over TAA mainly just because it fitted the budget, and that's the only reason there. I must admit, I'm not overly keen. Doherty was Wolves when I actually selected the team. I've got 5 Wolves defenders, so I'm a bit, shit or bust, as they sort of say. There we go. And therefore, I've managed to sort of spend a bit more money up front. I've gone for Salah, Rashford, Antonio, Maddison, and Reina up front. So I think that's quite a solid team, and I quite like my attacking options. I have a plan in the sense that, and we haven't sort of talked about it in much depth, but the only reason Maddison's in the team is because I plan to transfer, or the original plan was to transfer him out for Greenwood when Man United play Palace. So I was a bit limited on who to slot in on that position because Leicester played before Man United and most of my other options played afterwards. My second rookie mistake is considering that and considering Rashford has pulled out of England's squad, I should actually have Greenwood in there, which means I could have a more expensive player instead of Maddison. So I'll probably start with Greenwood. Maddison will turn into Richarlison, who plays before the Man United. I think they're playing West Brom, and then Man United play Crystal Palace, and then I can bring in Rashford if he starts that game. And then slightly further down the line, once I Man City, I think have got quite difficult fixtures for the first, 8 to 10 games. Antonio may transform into Kevin De Bruyne, and one of my defenders will. Hopefully, I've identified a cheap defender to free up the additional funds.
Cool, thank you for that, Al. And finally, we've just brought up my draft, so I'm reasonably happy with this draft, though. From what we've talked about for the last hour or so, I'm kind of flickering on changing the view. The first notable person that people will see on screen is Meslier in goal for Leeds. So he's 2.1 million. He hasn't played in pre-season, but he has been away on international duty. He got into the Leeds side towards the back end of last season and kept 7 clean sheets in their last 10. The only reason I got him in there, I think Leeds defensively will do okay, but I'm not that bothered about that really. I just want a goalkeeper in at 2.1 million. And at the moment, he fits the bill because then it allows me to spend a bit more money further up. If I was to choose another keeper, I would, I'd probably maybe think about McCarthy, maybe Ramsdale. If I can get up to Alisson, maybe, but because Alisson obviously won't offer any attacking threat at all, whereas defenders, midfielders, a little bit loath to spend 4.4 million keeper. But
just sorry to jump in, but just an interesting thing I observed is that the pricing of the goalkeepers is really harsh this year compared to previous years. So the difference between the premiums and the not premiums is not that much if you compare every other position. And I mean, this is something that's really, so historically, I would have said there's probably always been 5 keepers under 3 million. I'm looking at the Brighton keeper and he's 3.2. And I'm waiting to see, there's a few of the promoted boys, but I don't want to touch any of them until I know how they're going to perform in the Prem. And it's made that keeper decision a lot harder this year. I mean, if he's 2.1, I will be on him over Alisson because of the value. But yeah, it's a really weird pricing compared to every other position, the way they've priced the keepers this year.
If he starts, he is the best value all game. Out of a doubt, because you can leave him in all season, 2.1 million, the second cheapest player in the whole game, popping up your team. I'm currently on a 4-4-2, but it's kind of flexible, right? So I've got this 11, I've got a pool of 15 or 16 players I'm playing around with, trying to find a kind of optimal team. I've got Alexander-Arnold, Robertson, and I've got Tierney and Vinagre. So I really like, they're all fullbacks. They all play for decent defensive teams. They should all get a few assists as well. Tierney and Vinagre, as you say, way overpriced. I actually think Robertson's a bit underpriced as well at 5.1 because he always scores shed loads of points. Even though they signed the left back, I think as cover. I think Robertson's number 1. Will start practically every game. And and if you think as well, these if you look at the dynamic there of my team, I know we maybe shouldn't be thinking of FA Cup just yet, but if you look at my team, I've got Liverpool, Arsenal, Man United, Man City, and Wolves players. They should all do reasonably well, FA Cup as well. But yeah, so back 4 of Alexander-Arnold, Robertson, Tierney, and Vinagre. I've currently got a midfield of De Bruyne, Fernandes, who are not going anywhere from my team, Greenwood and Foden. So the kind of notable omission there obviously is Salah, as we have talked about. So you just can't afford Salah, De Bruyne, and Bruno at the moment. You can't afford them if you want to have good defense and a reasonable attack as well. So I need to do some work around there, and make a sacrifice or two. And then up front, so I've got Werner and Martial, both who I think are, again, fantastic value. I'm very, very happy with that team. It hasn't got Salah. This is, and this is my boggle, I suppose. I'm going to have to make a decision of whether to go with this team without Salah, or whether to go without someone else, do a serious downgrade, maybe downgrade Robertson, downgrade De Bruyne, downgrade Martial. I don't really want to do those, but I have to make a sacrifice somewhere. But just to touch on strategy, because I know everyone will be really, really interested in TFF strategy as well. Now, this is important, and our How to Win at TFF guide on the site will tell you everything about how to be successful in this game. The first half of the season, you need to save transfers back, and I think I don't think anyone will argue against that, even more so than Guy. And the reason for that is because the FA Cup is included in TFF. Second half of the season, you sometimes find that teams like Man City, Man United, for example, get 4 or 5 games to Liverpool's one. I think the last 2 seasons, Liverpool have been knocked out of the FA Cup early, and it means that you jump on Man City, you jump on Man United, and they get 3, 4, 5 games to their one. But it's very, very difficult sitting on your hands when there are players who are scoring goals that are not on your team and your rank is not where you want to be. But I kind of look at the game strategy-wise in 2 halves of the season, right? So first half, really, really try not to use more than 10 transfers. I've never managed it, right? I think the best I've ever done is about 14 I've used. I had 26 back at Christmas. Coincidentally, was when I had my highest rank. Well, it's very, very tough, but this is why I'm not really looking at the fixtures as such, because, kind of looking at that team as a very solid, rounded team that I would probably look to leave for as long as possible and only make changes if someone was dropped, someone was injured, or someone was seriously out of form, and there was that kind of enabler came to the fore. So say Saliba at Arsenal, so say he started playing every game, I would look to get him in nice and early because it frees up budget for later on in the season. And that's an example of of a change I would make. Or if Aguero got injured or Jesus got injured, and either Aguero or Jesus was nailed for a long amount of time, I would then put that player, and that's the only time I would look to make a change. So strategically, chaps, Carl first. What is your strategy transfer wise for the season?
Before I go on my strategy on transfer wise, I'll just pose a few questions for you on your team. You mentioned your keeper's second most cheapest player in the whole game. Well, what's your plans if he doesn't play?
Well,
so if he doesn't play, how quickly? You're talking about you'd have to at least 2 transfers, one to free somebody up, and one to bring him in. Obviously, you'll monitor that yourself, and there is a risk around that. And I've noticed, I think your team is really, really strong, and I wish there wasn't a blank game week. But if you've got 5 players missing from the first game week, did you ever think about just transferring them one in? Because one thing that you could do, especially Man City having difficult fixtures, you could chuck out De Bruyne, and could you put in someone like Aubameyang, who's got some really tasty fixtures to start with, gets 2 fixtures for 1 transfer? Those were just a few observations.
No, and they're really good ones, and ones I've put some thought into. So first you're right with Meslier, so I will only play him if I'm 99% sure. I'm not going to risk that. I'm not going to, and I'm also, if I do take the risk, I'm also not going to not have the budget to be able to upgrade him. But I will only play him if I'm absolutely sure that it's monitoring right up to the morning of the kickoff. If Mez is looking like starting, I think he's worth a risk anyway. And may keep some budget back potentially to look at a Ramsdale or wherever else. But I don't like spending 4.4 million on a keeper. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure Alisson will provide very good value. If I've got the chance of putting 2.3 million elsewhere in my team, which is it essentially means I can have any player anywhere, then that's my kind of around there. Around De Bruyne and Aubameyang, I have thought of that exact move. So that's the exact move I'm doing in Sky, and it's a move I still may do. So this team, it's not my as I said, I've got a pool of 15 or 16 sort of players I'm playing around with, to find that kind of optimal start. To get the 2 games out of Aubameyang would make sense, especially because they've got Fulham and West Ham, I think, so we could easily score a few points there. And we'll come on to how many points the transfer worth in a second. But say Aubameyang scores a goal in each of those games, which is, I wouldn't say it's likely, but over the 2 games, he may get 14 points. I think that's worth a transfer. So, yeah, I take your point that I could start with Aubameyang, then move down to De Bruyne. The only issue is if I do that, I need to find 0.8 million or whatever it is in my team as well. So there's that to think about. But no, they're all valid points there, Carl. As I've said, I'm not set on this as my starting 11. I've still got, I said, there's still a lot to think of. Salah, Aubameyang. I do like Holgate's shout. I hadn't really thought of Holgate. I'm not sure he's as nailed as you seem to think, Luke. He may be, but there is, they have got a few centre backs there. We'll touch on bargains in a bit as well, but I have been looking at Bardsley, potentially Loughton, Saliba if he plays. There's a few in there as well, but we'll touch on that now. But anyway, sorry, Carl, back onto your strategy.
Yeah.
How many transfers you plan to use in the first half of the year?
Well, I'm very similar to yourself. I did mention 3 transfers that I sort of have planned in the short term, but apart from that, I hope to make none. I know that I will. My preference is to make no transfers and just monitor to make sure that my players are fit. If there's a bargain that jumps out, then that's a different story. And what I mean bargain jumps out, that won't be within the first 4 game weeks because, like Pookie, you can start off like house on fire, but it's just a flash in the pan. But if something does jump out, fine. I think this year, more than ever, you want to sit on your hands and keep as many transfers as possible because matches are going to be coming thick and fast. So your players will be injured. There's every club has got League Cup games midweek, so they're playing twice a week. Going to be picking up injuries, and then you've got the funny game week 18 that's split over 2 game weeks. So there may be big opportunities around there. So I hope not to use any until game week 18. And I know that's not possible, so it'd be as close to 0 as I can manage.
That makes sense. And what about yourself, Luke?
I will be using transfers. So up until the end of the Christmas period, so just prior to the first FA Cup game, I've given myself a target of 12 or less is where I'm going. And that breaks down into 2 categories. So I've got 5 transfers earmarked for tactical, and I regretted it last year. So there was a pod we did, I think it was the first one, where I looked at, there was a pool of about 7 players, all under 2.8 million in defence. And I wish I'd made those transfers and just got the back line of all of those dirt cheap ones. I would have had a much better season. I'm not making that mistake again. So bar Trent and probably Tierney, as long as he keeps his place, I will end up with 5 at the back, and I will have 3 budget enabling defenders, hopefully. So Vinagre will be leaving at some point because Johnny will be, I think he's due back end of October from memory. So he will come out of my team, but there will be another defender at his price range. I'm hoping Holgate's nailed. I mean, Ancelotti's stuck with him, like DCL, the kind of 2 players that he's put his arm around and seems to like. So I think he's their first choice centre half now. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not an Everton fan, so please call me out if I'm wrong on that. But again, he's kind of a placeholder because that Sheffield United team of last year, like Stevens and Baldock and Egan, they were all stupidly low priced, and there will be a team where we get that. So 5 transfers will go on that value point, and within that, Ryan will go up to Alisson or Edison, whichever of those 2 teams look like they're the best defensive team, but I'm certain it's one of those 2 teams. And then the others I'm going to leave for either 3-for-1s. I'm not going to bother too much for 2-for-1s other than the over to KDB or over to Fernandes early doors, but I don't want to be blanking. Your team's going to be miles down in the mini league after game week 1, so I'd love to be in your household after that. But yeah, and then I think that will leave me about 5 transfers for reactionary things. So this will be, the injuries, random droppings, those sorts of things. But I think in a really different thing that obviously we experienced last year, but the thing we're going to have this year, I'm absolutely certain one club at some point between now and probably February, March time next year will get a breakout COVID, and you're going to lose a whole club. Now, the strategy you've got with loads of people from effectively two big teams, and they're probably going to be the best value players, bar, chuck Liverpool in there. I'm not going to aim to have more than 2 players from any team for up until we get to know more about how that's going to be. And that's my real motivator for keeping as many transfers back, because I just don't want to be stuck with like 3 or 4 players from one club and then that club be all put in lockdown, and then you lose weeks of those players, because that's effectively 8 transfers. If you think KDB, if Man City got it, KDB's gone. And you're going to want him back. The only other factor is the Messi factor. Now, I think today's view was it's off, but yesterday it was on. Tomorrow it'll probably be back on again. Messi will break the game. So that's a transfer. If he comes in, he should be priced at 8 million. I'm assuming you go down as a forward. I will find a way of getting him in. Simple as, because I think, look at his goal scoring record, 30 odd goals every season forever. He's just got to be in your team.
I agree, and I think he'll also make the other Man City players more attractive as well, because they'll be playing with Lionel Messi as well, right? Just a couple of your points. So you say about me being low down the ranks in game week 1. You don't win anything for winning game week 1, right? I suppose this is my kind of
the weekly prize, thing. Mate.
No,
weekly prize.
You don't win anything. You don't win anything at Christmas. You don't win anything in March. You win at the end of the season. And I think this is my whole point. If someone wants to use 30 transfers at Christmas, right, and have 10 left for the second half of the season, I guarantee I will overtake you. If that's how players want to play the game. It's just you see it over and over and over again. In all my mini leagues, there's always guys who shoot ahead. 100 points are clearing me. 150, 200 points. And gradually you see it 180, 160, 120. I've still got 15, 20 transfers left. This poor guy's got 4. He's stuck with a bunch of duds in his team. So I understand your point about using some tactical transfers. I'm all for that as well, right? As you say, if Messi signs, if Jesus gets injured and Aguero is just playing at front every game, I will find a way to get Aguero in. And this is why I said try to aim for no more than maybe 10 or 12. Because you will use transfers. I wouldn't use luxury transfers. That's the point I'm trying to make. I don't think 2-for-1s or 3-for-1s are valuable at all in the first half of the season. They're much more valuable later on. But I take your point on COVID as well. I'm talking about a traditional sort of season here, whereas who knows what's going to happen. So, but yeah, it's good to have different views on things. There's no kind of right answer, is there? So I would also say this is the first season. So I'm putting in 5 teams this season as well. So I'm going to put in 5 very similar looking teams with some different kinds of variations. I'm going to try and win I'm going to try and win a few mini leagues. And go for the whole thing as well. With 5 teams. I think the pricing this year is so generous. With those pool of 15 or 16 players I've got, I can have 5 different variations of a team, and I think I can do really, really well. I've only ever entered 1 team. I've entered 2, but played the same team. I've played the same team over the 2 teams to get in more mini leagues and stuff. I've never really entered more than 1 before, so as well, which will be an interesting week.
One thing that's interesting, because I'm keen to understand your tactics as well. But one thing I've noticed is it's quite nice to see that all 3 of us have got very different drafts, and I think we've all been, very successful at periods in this game. And the fact that there's some certain players that are cropping up in all of our teams. So Vinagre, look, I think all 3 of us have got him. So look, there you go, everybody get him. It's no brainer really right now, unless there's some transfer for a left back. But I think that's quite reassuring to me that we've all got different approaches, but we've all had relative success in this game over the time.
I think we've all got Robertson.
No, I don't.
Or, well, I was going to say or TAA, right? So you definitely need either Robertson or TAA or both. Say Vinagre is probably a shoe-in. We've all got Werner as well, at 5.6. He looks an absolute. A lot of options, I think. There's a lot of really good options. It's not hard to build. Like in previous years, you may have to make 2 or 3 massive sacrifices. I'm looking this year at the moment. The only player I can't get in is either say Salah or KDB or Martial. It's only one sacrifice, whereas normally I have to make a lot of sacrifices. We all had players like Cantwell in last year, and all these kind of players. You'd never pick Cantwell by choice, would you? He did all right in the end, in all fairness, but he's not something you go, at the start of the season, Cantwell, that's the guy for me. The cheap options this year, Vinagre is a good option in his own right. I think. I also think that Meslier, the keeper, Leeds defensively are actually okay. I think he'll score some points. All right, he's not going to score as many as Alisson, probably as many as Ramsdale. But I think he'll still score a lot of points and have the best points per million potentially in the whole game. Okay, we're prattling on now. Let's move on to some questions. So we tried to answer a few on the way down, but let's see if we can answer them. We've answered most of them actually. So Paul McNulty asks, I always look for the gold standard coined by Carl, I think, of 30 points per million for a player to be value. With Casey's being downgraded to assists, is this something you consider when selecting players? I think we've kind of touched on this, haven't we? Maybe the Man City players, maybe not as valuable as previously. Have you got a kind of answer for that, Carl?
No, I'm not quite sure if the numbers that he quotes are right either. I think it was about 40 to 50 points a week, if I remember rightly. That's like what you're trying to aim for. So I can't remember what that is per million. But yeah, it definitely come down without the key contributions. But yeah, I haven't actually put in a figure that I aim for every week this year.
Right. Yeah, we're just looking back, at that first slide, we saw, De Bruyne, Sterling, Mahrez, Doherty, they all lost a lot. So I think just in terms of our thinking, while they've always been incredibly valuable players before, maybe they're not as valuable kind of as they once were essentially. Simon Baldock, with the new offering of 5-4-1, what formations do you consider to be the most flexible and offer long-term value? Note, I distinctly remember you commenting, I think you're talking to me, that was when I was on Fantasy Football Geek, that you wish that this was an option. So I am going to try it out and see what happens. 5-4-1 looks to be the option. You look at Carl's modelling, says 5-4-1. I think in terms of flexibility, either 4-5-1 or 4-4-2. So Luke mentioned it earlier. Are probably the most flexible in that you can flick to another striker, flick to a defender. If you're on 5-4-1, you can't now go to 5-3-2. You can't go from a defender straight to a striker, so you haven't got that flexibility that you need for a couple of moves. So to answer your question, Simon, we think that 5-4-1, maybe 4-5-1 is probably the most offers the long-term value, but probably 4-4-2 or 4-5-1 is probably the more flexible one there. Luke, can I ask you this one? There are now a number of elite midfield options, Bruno, De Bruyne, etc. Do you consider it more viable to have lock and set 2 or a rotating 2 depending on fixtures and form, or just hold 1 and have a mix of price point players across your midfield?
I treat midfield and my strikers as as one group. And so I'll be jumping between. So if you look at the formation, the team I've got 3 premiums. And that's what I'll look to. So I'll be looking to probably rotate one of those premiums, and it will be only ideally in the second half of the season. Now, if fixtures, it's what I'm targeting. I'm sorry, it's a bit of a rambling answer. So the answer is there's a few that I'm looking at. So KDB, Bruno, Salah, right, are the 3 players I really want, and then probably Werner. But because of his price, he's not a premium price. He's not over 6 million. So I don't count him in this game as premium price. So he's in. And then it will be those 3 are the 3 that I want. And it's finding any way of getting those 3 in. Now, if I can find a way of freeing up budget to get another in, then I'll look at the next person I want in on that. But the reality is none of those 3 players I've just mentioned there are indispensable. and let's, for argument's sake, say Liverpool, and I can't remember the fixture list, but Liverpool come up against a run where they've got United, then they've got City, then they've got Arsenal, and then they've got Spurs. Right, I don't really want Salah, particularly if those three of those were away games, because he never scores away from home. So that's a point where if I can get like maybe a 2-for-1, but then also a better fixture run, then I would bounce. But transfers are so precious, so it's really, I think TFF is, with the premiums, wherever possible, it's pick your horse and stick with them in the first half of the season, and then in the second half of the season, it's pick the players from the teams that you think are going to end up in the FA Cup final, because they're going to get you 5 more games. And so if even if they don't play a couple of those games, but 3 more extra games, and the final, it is a game of two halves, to coin that rubbish phrase. But the first half is pick your horse and stick with them. The second one is a lot more jump around.
I think this is why this season looks quite unique in terms of the pricing, because I don't think you have too much. I think you could afford, as you've mentioned there, you could afford, with a sacrifice, Salah, Werner, KDB or Bruno, maybe even both of them if you went for 2 ultra cheap defenders or a 3rd, 4th cheap midfielder. You could still afford, Alexander-Arnold, Vinagre, and other ones. I don't think it's that hard this year. And don't forget, we've got Greenwood and Foden, who are just sat there, and 3.6 and 3.4 million, who are, at points in the season will be incredible value as well.
But just another point on that. Yeah. So there's a few players, and I know we haven't really talked about it, and I'm not proposing we start talking about this, but there's a few players that could be ridiculous value. So, but most of them are midfielders. So like Antonio, right? He's 4 million something. He's in midfield, but he's actually playing as a striker, right? There's another one to chuck in the mix, and suddenly your 3, your Salah, KDB, and Bruno slots, you wanted to lose one because you can get better value out of Foden, Greenwood, and Antonio. And there'll be another one. I'm not saying it'll be Almiron, but but there will be another one. And you may end up thinking, do you know what? I'm not going to touch the midfielders. I'm going to chuck it up front or something, because you might just have ridiculous value. It's a funny pricing. So it's good. It's made the game very, very different for me this year, because there's so many options that you can have. And I think that's borne out by our teams, is that all 3 of us are very, very different. Normally, I think if we did this last year, all 3 of our teams would have probably been 80% the same.
Paul McNulty asks, Meslier, 2.1 million, is he a trap? I think we've touched on this. We think, if he starts, if he looks likely to start, he's an absolute bargain. He's probably the biggest bargain in the game. If he doesn't start, we either have to take the risk of him starting and transfer him out, which would be a crap start. But I think for me there as well, the upside, right? So if he does start and I can balance my team around him, I'm laughing. I think then I'm off to the best possible start. I've got 2.1 starting goalkeeper for a reasonably defensive team, which sets up the rest of my team for the whole season. If he doesn't start and I have to do a transfer or 2, okay, hard luck, do the moves and get over it. And that's kind of how I'm seeing it a little bit. If it's obvious, if it's like a 50-50, if he's going to play, I probably wouldn't start with him, right? Because that's a bit silly. But if it's 80 or 90%, which at the moment for me is looking like it is, I think he's good value.
My one challenge, and this is because of the difference between TFF and the other games, right? Because you don't get the save points for the keepers. No. This is why I would rather have so somebody like Nick Pope, fine, because Burnley, and Crystal Palace to a degree, they're going to set up against most teams and it's going to be 1-0 losses at most. But most games, they're going to get their fair share of clean sheets. My concern with getting a promoted keeper at whatever price is, let's just, for argument's sake, say Leeds are very good defensively, but they lose most games 1-0. You're getting 2 points. And fine, 2 million, that's probably all you need. But they've got to play the big 4, and they're going to get spanked by one of those teams at some point this season, probably more than, I'm sorry for Leeds fans. So I hope you do well, to be honest. But but that's where, I guess, because you're not getting those save points, unlike Sky or FPL, you're not going to get that backup plan that you get in those games.
He's basically a free player, because you the minimum price for a player is 2 million, right?
Yeah.
So he's basically allowing me to spend all my money elsewhere on the pitch, and that's just the way. Even if he gets 50 points over the season, I'm not bothered. I could have Ramsdale. Okay, Ramsdale may score 80 or 90 points. David De Gea last year scored 128 points. It's like 70 extra points. But again, everyone plays different. Everyone values differently as well.
Can I just sort of say that my defensive rating for Leeds is as good as quite a lot of mid-table teams in the Premier League, and I'd put Leeds as the same sort of level as teams like Brighton and Crystal Palace when you bear everything into consideration. So I'm sold. If he's playing not for the team that here, but for another draft, I'll definitely be putting him in. Actually, it'd be very similar to the team you've got, Andre, to be honest. He
kept 7 clean sheets in the last 10. After lockdown, after he came into the side, I think Leeds are going to. There's some analysis on the hub as well from FPL Stag. It's kind of FPL based, right? But it talks about Leeds. Leeds as a team got solid defensive base. So even if he keeps 6 or 8 clean sheets over the season and he gets me 50, 60 points, really don't mind that because I'm getting the point. Anyway, we've done him to death now, haven't we?
Yeah.
Question from at MUFC UAE. Do you think Bertrand is a good option? So he's 3 million, Bertrand. I personally think he is a good option. Carl, do you think Bertrand is a good option?
He's a good option. But I think there are other ones at that price level, you could get as well. So I've got no. He hasn't sort of shown. He hasn't come up on my radar to consider, but I don't see anything wrong in him.
You can get Walker Peters is the right back, and he at 2.8. When you think about players like Benaga and stuff, but I think Bertrand at 3 million is good, and and maybe the reason he hasn't come on our radar is because you can get Tierney for 3.2. And get Ben Davis, who we haven't mentioned yet, potentially. If he looks like he's nailed down the left back spot, Spurs for 3.2. You can get Foden for 3.4, Greenwood for 3.6. And this is what I mean about all those cheap players. They're probably kind of masking other players as well, really, aren't they? But no, I think we all think he's a decent option. Simon Baldock, Luke, looking at the opening 10 fixtures, because you're the ones who's kind of looking at the opening fixtures in terms of making some changes. It seems that Fulham, Southampton, Wolves, Man U, and to a lesser extent, Chelsea and Leicester have good opening fixtures. Any player suggestions? And those balance the books. So I think we mentioned a few, but carry on.
All right, I'm going to put my Sky hat on here. So I'm going to go for the first 4 fixtures. So Arsenal, really good fixtures, in my opinion, for the opening period. And they're premium, but bar a few of them, they're not really being priced as premium. So I think Arsenal's a place I'd be looking at. Southampton got good fixtures again. So those are sort of for the budget options. I'd probably be looking at Saints, and that I think that's borne out by my Armstrong inclusion, Tierney and Aubameyang being in there. It's probably worth noting I'm a firm believer that with the top probably 4 or 5 teams, and certainly the last year's top 2, I don't think fixtures come into it at all. So, and I'd probably I think the way United were playing and probably Chelsea with the signings they've made, I think those 4 fixtures are completely off the table now. So it's about having the form players from those 4 teams. I think Arsenal, you probably will still need a bit of fixtures, so you've got them early on. Southampton, I've certainly McCarthy, somebody that would I'd rather have him, but I just can't. I think I'm 0.2 short from getting him. It's probably worth noting at the other end, Antonio would 100% have been in my team, but they play Newcastle. So which Newcastle are you going to get? They might be all right. They might, because sometimes they do turn up defensively, but then their run of fixtures is absolutely horrendous. So Antonio is someone I've earmarked. I think for game week 11, I think is where they have a run of 9. Week 2 to week 10 is just horrendous. But then that means by default they're going to have a massive run the other end. So I think, for me, there's some obvious teams in there that have got them, but Arsenal and Southampton were the ones from my Sky research that I looked at being the ones to jump on kind of more than any other. But that point about those big four teams, I just think you take fixtures off the table. So maybe if you're looking for your sub 3.5 million players, your premiums, I wouldn't worry about the fixtures at all.
I think some other players we haven't mentioned yet, but also could be good, who do have good fixtures to start. So Spurs and Chelsea, have both got good fixtures to start. Ziyech at 4.3, I think, could potentially be an absolute steal as well. I was looking at him before I knew about the second KC rule had been removed, and he was one of the first things on my team sheet at 4.3. He's a bit of a playmaker on set pieces and things. I thought he would have been good. I'm a bit off him now, and he did have an injury, didn't he, in a friendly game? But I think Ziyech at 4.3 could be a really good option. Pulisic at 5 as well. Again, he's going to be involved in a lot of goals, but he'll be assisting the assister. But he does win penalties. He'll score points. I think Pulisic at 5 million. I don't like the double up with Werner at 5.6 to start, which is the only reason why one of these guys isn't in my draft at the moment. I really want to double up on Chelsea to start because we don't know how they're going to look. Right, we can guess they're going to start well. So, and Son, I think at 6 is a good option as well. But again, he's a bit expensive, I think, because he's quite a streaky player. But if you think about all the ownership levels we talked about earlier, none of these were mentioned. They're very, very low owned players, but who are very creative, very explosive, and who can score a lot of points in a short period of time. So I wouldn't put anyone off having any players. Ziyech was in my original draft. He's the enabler for me to get to a really good kind of 4-5-1 Ziyech, because he's obviously a billion less than the others. Any thoughts, Carl, on any potential bargains?
Nothing which hasn't already been mentioned.
Got a question for you, Andrew, off the WhatsApp group from Arwen Bobe. Hopefully I've pronounced that right. But he said he's not sure if it's been covered before, but is there an expected value of points gained from transferred, as in, does the value exceed over the course of the season with more data available, so it's better to hold them and aggressively chase 3-for-1s when they're more assured of the gains that might be available?
Yeah, so I think the general sort of rule in how much a transfer is worth is generally in line with Sky, kind of 10 to 15 points. I think if you're getting 10 points a transfer, I think you'll have a very good season. So if you add, just this most simplistic terms, if you add 400 points onto your starting 11 total, looking historically, which I've done, you will have a good season. Anything more than that, you'll have an excellent season. So if you can get the points out of those, the one thing everyone forgets, I know that Carl is a big advocate of this, when we talk about 2-for-1s and 3-for-1s, you've got to remember that the kind of strategy around that is bringing the player back, and you're actually using 2 transfers. It's not just about bringing a player in to get your 10 or 15 points and then bringing the other player back, because then you've actually used 2 transfers. So for that, you need to be earning between 20 to 30 points. So that's a big point to kind of bear in mind. There's no point for me bringing in, say you've got Kane, swapping for Aubameyang, and he gets 2 goals in 2 games. You think, right, job done, I'll bring back Kane. You've used 2 transfers for 14 points, or potentially 12 points if Kane has got has had a game in between and blanked as well. That's 6 to 7 points per transfer. Not enough. So this is why we advocate, as Arwen has mentioned, waiting for the second half of the season when you get the 3-for-1s, when you get the 4-for-1, get the injuries, because I think you did an article, Luke, where it shows that clean sheets at the end of a season are far more kind of prevalent than they are, at kind of other points of the season as well, and get these trends. And I would, kind of mentioned it earlier, but I would wait, I would hold fast, I would try and hold your rank, have a very, very well-rounded, decent, consistently score you points. Don't miss out on any ownership holes, so look back at the ownership there, De Bruyne, Alexander-Arnold, Salah, all these players, you've got them all already, right? So if they explode, you've got you don't have to worry. In the meantime, people are going ahead of you in your mini leagues because they're bringing in all these extra players for all these extra games. But at the end of it, come the business end of the season, which is what matters, which is when mini leagues are won and lost, that's where you swoop back in. Hopefully that's answered Arwen's question, I think. And we've got Anything else to add on that? No, I think
Tumbleweeds. No, I think
No.
you've done a great answer, mate.
Okay, so I think that's it then. So we've had another massive episode. At the start, before we record, we always say, right, guys, let's try and keep it under an hour. This one's like, I'm not sure, like hour and 45 or something like that. But it is a pre-season one. We've gone through a lot of play, a lot of options, a lot of formations, a lot of detail. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Hopefully it's given everyone kind of food for thought, on kind of what to think about with the starting teams. If you are a Fantasy Football Hub subscriber, make sure you join our TFF mini league, which has a free £200 prize pool. So if anyone's sure of that, if you are a member who haven't seen it, go on the Hub or drop me a message. If you're not a member of the Hub, to join the Hub and get a 25% preseason discount, which is valid until the 11th of September, click on the top link in the description below. Many thanks as usual to Luke and Carl for all your time and patience listening. So I get very passionate on TFF because it is my favorite game, and I get very into it. But thank you for all your insight, Carl. Thank you so much for all the data. It's so it drives my whole approach to to kind of playing the game. And thank you, Luke, for all your years of experience in playing and great answers and insight to everything as well. Thank you to our loyal watchers and listeners for their great questions and comments. Thanks to all the guys in the WhatsApp chat for all their questions too. Hope we've answered them all. If we haven't, I will answer tomorrow in the WhatsApp groups. Luke, where can people get hold of you?
So predominantly on Twitter. So my handle on Twitter is FPL_equation. So yeah, ping me messages there.
Great stuff. And Carl, where can people get hold of you?
Yeah, I'm on the Fantasy Football Hub, and also I'm on Twitter, Darkest Jungle, if anybody wants to DM me or ask me any questions.
And don't forget that all Carl's algorithm stuff he's shown here for TFF do have one for Sky Fantasy and an FPL as well. So this video recording will be on the Fantasy Football Hub, Sky and TFF YouTube channel, with the podcast versions available on all major podcast platforms. If you liked what you watched, please press the like button. Remember to subscribe to the channel in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. If you enjoyed your listen, please rate the podcast and leave a comment. It really does help us increase our rankings. Our website is fantasyfootballhub.co.uk, where you'll find masses of free preseason content and everything you need for fantasy football all under one roof, including player comparison tools to fixture ticker, Opta-stats, top player team reveals, a price predictor tool for FPL, and much, much more, all of which is on our new free app for iOS and Android, which you'll find in the App Store searching for Fantasy Football Hub. For premium members, we also now have our dedicated TFF WhatsApp group. It seems to be growing every day. There will be lots of drafts and ideas flying around in there over this next week, I have no doubt. Ian Parrin of Sky Planner fame, who is now playing TFF this season, is busy building a TFF transfer planner as we speak. To be ready hopefully in the next few weeks for Hub members, and I will be revealing my finalised Game Week 1 team and tactics late next week, and also write about this every week exclusively for Hub members. As mentioned, we are currently running a 25% preseason discount for new memberships. If you want to take advantage of this, click on the top link in the description. We'll be back in around a month's time looking at our starts, the emerging bargains, plans for the following month, trying to talk Luke out of his 11th transfer of the season in as early as October. See you then, everyone, and good night. Thank you.